You are listening to the Invitation Church podcast. To learn more about Invitation Church, visit us online at invitation605.com. You can also download our app on iTunes and Google Play by searching for Invitation 605.
Okay, so we need a little help this morning. I need you to throw your hand in the air if you know somebody named John, right? Anybody know someone named John? Okay. So you may not know this, but there's 3.18 million people in the world who is named John, which that's fairly incredible. So people say, I don't know who these people are, but people say that there's 1,000 little boys that are born every year, right? So that in there 0.5% of those that are born are named John. So it's kind of been a really popular name going all the way back. Again, people say 1924 was kind of when this name got popular, and it's still popular because we all know somebody named John. And I was thinking about some famous people who are named John, and I'm wondering if you could identify who they are. So there's going to be a face on the screen, and I'll give you a hint. Their first name's John, okay? But what I need you to do is I need you to shout out on this really cold day. We need to be nice and warm in here. This is sweatshirt Sunday in the house of God, okay? I need you to yell out their last name. Are you with me? Okay, all right. Give us number one, Brock. John Cena. Good job. Okay, and these ones, we kind of need everybody to participate because there's some people who have been on earth longer that are your time is coming, okay? So I don't mean it like that. I mean we're gonna need your help for this activity. Okay, number two, Brock. Who's this guy? Yes, John Lennon. Nice. Okay, next one. John Candy. Yes. Cool Runnings, right? Yes. Amazing. Okay, next one. Yeah, John Wayne. Okay, next one. Oh, man, don't you miss that show? Man, what a great show that was. And, I wanted to do my hair like that as a kid. Golly. He has annoyingly awesome hair, doesn't he? All right. Okay, next one. Mayer. Yeah, John Mayer. Yes, good. Okay, next one. John Elway. Good job. Give yourselves a round of applause. You did a great job. Actually, give yourself a round of applause. Thank you. My goodness. So today we want to talk about someone in the scriptures who's named John. And if we looked on the back of the baseball card of his life, right? What's true about him? Where did he show up? What was he involved in? We all have those things, right? Where we went to school, where we've worked, who's in our family. Here, just a few things we would notice about John. First, we would notice about John that he is a part of a trio of disciples. That he was part of an inner circle of disciples with Peter and with James, and there's these three moments in the scriptures where it's just Peter and it's himself and it's James. And in one, there's this daughter of this man named Jairus, and she has fallen asleep, and this is more than a nap. They are worried that she has died, and so they call Jesus to come and do something about it, and Jesus brings these three guys along with him. They raise her to life. They are in the room when resurrection happens. We can sing about resurrection. We hope for resurrection. They are present. They see it with their eyes. And then they are present with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane at the very end of the story. And Jesus is pouring his heart out to his Father. Hey, I know we talked about this. I know that this was kind of the plan from the beginning, but if there's an exit here, if there's another way, but if there's not, I submit to your will. They're present with Jesus in that moment. And then at the very end, something in the scriptures we call transfiguration. Like it's that moment when Jesus is being raised not just from life, but into glory, to be reunited with his Father in heaven. He's given some very last encouragements to the disciples. Like they're there at that point. These amazing moments. So he's a part of some significant moments. He's got a brother. His brother's name is James. This is in Luke chapter 5. You can read about his brother. We don't hear a lot about his brother, which is probably annoying to him. That's a story that some of you live. It's always about the brother, isn't it? It's not about me. That's a part of his experience. He has fishing partners. Andrew was somebody that he fished with, and then this other guy, Peter, that we talked about 2 weeks ago. These guys were fishing buddies together. They went out every day and fished and made money for their families and had all kinds of conversations. And I'm sure there's like incredible stories to share of all of the stuff that maybe didn't happen, but they said happened out on the lake with the fish they caught and the fish they didn't catch. He's the author of 5 New Testament books. So this is the man that writes the book of John. This is the man that writes the book of Revelation. This is the man that writes the book of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Those books at the end of the New Testament that you got to lick your fingers to find. He's the author of those books. That happens to be like 5% of the New Testament. He's a prisoner. At the very end of his life, when he's an old man, there's this Roman emperor named Domitian. And Domitian sounds like the word dominate. And that was kind of how he showed up in the world. And he sent John to the island of Patmos, where is actually the series of visions that we have recorded as the book of Revelation. That's where all that happens. And so he's like, oh, you want to talk about Jesus? You want to preach about Jesus? I'm going to send you into exile, just like your ancestors. So sends him to this island of Patmos, and then he comes back from the island of Patmos, and he's near Ephesus, and he creates this church planting network of house churches. So in the ancient world, it wasn't like, oh, we would just gather as one big church. Kind of you're at tables today. This is a good image of how it was in the ancient world. That there was a church that met in this house, and in this house, and in this house, and in this house. And John is pastoring all of these new followers of Jesus. He's taking everything that's on the back of his baseball card, all the things that he has experienced, and he wants to relay, to communicate, to demonstrate all of that power, all of that goodness, all of that faithfulness, like all of those moments of uncertainty that he has lived with in alongside Jesus. He wants to share all of that with these house churches. And if there's anything that John has to say after all of those incredible experiences, he has really a central message for them. The book of 1 John, it's not really a letter. Sometimes it gets called that. It's really like a poetic sermon to these house churches. And it really kind of follows one of the last teachings of Jesus. So in the book of John, chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, is kind of like the last time Jesus is with his disciples. It's kind of like that moment when like you're driving your kiddo to college and you're like, well, okay, of all the things we've experienced together, here's what I want you to remember. Here's what I want you to know. Don't forget to call me. Don't pour laundry detergent on your clothes. Put them into the washer first, and then the clothes go in. You're having all of these conversations. This is kind of the moment that Jesus has with his disciples. 13 to 17, the book of John. And John picks up on these themes like the theme of love and truth and life. And he's speaking this into this network of house churches because the reality is people have started to follow Jesus, but they did not sustain their desire to follow Jesus. Like there was a point in their life, in their story, when they decided, you know what? This whole following Jesus thing is not what I thought it was going to be. Like it's bumpier than I imagined. Like I looked at the amusement park ride before I decided if I'm willing to jump on that thing. But the problem is I couldn't see on the backside that it twists you upside down. And so I've got no desire to ride on that thing. This is what is happening in the early church, in the city of Ephesus. And John's like, what do we do about this? How can I encourage the churches when they are watching people walk away from Jesus, people who claim Jesus as Savior and Lord and Redeemer and Restorer of all things, like we sang today, resurrected King? They were claiming all of those things, but then they walked away from him. What is it that John would desire to speak into these churches? And he wants to talk about the love of God as the center of the confession of someone who would follow Jesus. In a room this size, we have all different kinds of caricatures of who God is. We have listened to all kinds of people, both in digital means and analog means, talk about who God is. Let me tell you who God is. And today what we want to do is we just want to ask John, like, hey, who's God? How is it that you have experienced him? Like, what did you notice about who Jesus really is? What did you notice about his heart? What did you notice about what it means to show up in the world as him, as he's paying attention to all of the people around? Like, who's God? And 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, Brock's going to put that on the screen for us. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and know God. Dear friends, it's this word in the Greek, agapetoi, which just means loved one. So like when you're calling somebody a friend, you're reminding them that they're loved. And can I tell you, if there is something that people need in 2000, and we can say 25 now, it's for people to know that they're loved. If there's a question that rattles around in the heart, in the mind, in the soul, in the body of little kindergartners with a 47-pound backpack walking into school, it's that they would know that they're loved. That beyond what they do, beyond what they can achieve, beyond what they get right, they're loved. They're agapetoi. And for the 20-somethings walking around college campuses, and man, the semester is not working out the way that they would have thought it was going to work out. What is it that they need to know? Rather than changing who they are to somehow kind of fit into this group, I have to kind of change how I think and what I do and how I show up so that I can fit. They need to know that they're loved. Like that their very existence is a confession from on high that they're loved. And then for people who wake up every day and they go to a job. And it's a job you've been doing for a long time. And one of the things that's hard about the job you've been doing for a long time is that you don't feel seen. Like if I didn't show up, like would people notice? Not because your cubicle's empty, but like would your personhood be missed? Not what you contribute, but your very personhood in that place. Like, would anybody notice? Can I just tell you that I believe we have people walking around this world? That's the question that rattles around in their heart, and their soul, and their mind, and their body am I loved? Like, would anybody notice? John is speaking this over this community of faith. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the love of God. We're talking about love of others. And we're talking about love of self. So when we're talking about love, those are the three things we're talking about. What does it mean to love God? What does it mean to love other people? And what does it mean to love yourself? My contention today, there's one of those that you struggle with more. that some of us in the room today, can I just tell you, you really struggle with loving yourself. Like you're really critical of yourself. You are far more critical of yourself than anyone else would be. The rubric you use to grade yourself is an original rubric because nobody else uses it but you. Other of us in the room today, we have a hard time with people. Like we just are easily aggravated and annoyed by people. And some of us need to recover the love that we once had for God. Like some things have happened. We were really counting on him to show up, and we feel like he clocked out instead. And we're wondering, how do I love someone that I'm struggling to trust? Like, I don't know that I really trust God, so how could I love him? We're talking about love. We're talking about love of God. We're talking about love of others. We're talking about love of self. Can't love God unless you love other people, and you are other people. Can't love other people unless you love God. Can't love yourself unless you love God, and unless you have a practice of loving other people. These are all connected and related, says John. That's verse 7. Verse 8. We're just doing 3 verses today, so don't worry. So those of you who are like, dude, is he going to do this whole section? It's freezing outside. No. 3 verses. That's the first one. Verse 8. John says, whoever does not love does not know God. Why? Because God is love. So the question, like, who's God? Like, what's he like? John says, God is love. He's saying to know God is to know love. And to know God is to show love. To know God is to know what love is. I'm not going to sing the song. I almost put it in there, but I left it out. It takes a lot of self-control for those of you that know me well. But to know God is to know love, and to know God is to show love. So there's a question that rises out of the text, like, how are you doing at showing love? To the person who drives you nuts. To the person that you're easily aggravated with. It takes 0.9 seconds to be aggravated with them. Like, how are you doing showing love to yourself? Like when something goes wrong, there's this woman named Kristen Neff, and she's written this book called Practicing Self-Compassion. And oh, if I could give it to everyone that has chosen to follow Jesus. She says when something goes wrong, there's this little mantra that she speaks to herself, and it's just that this is a moment of suffering, and that suffering is a part of life. So when something doesn't go well, something goes wrong, goes not how you wanted it to go, and you think like you are the problem and you are the thing that's wrong, this is a moment of suffering. And suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. Those 3 parts. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. Sometimes I wonder, with the way that we speak to ourselves, I wonder if God would say, hey, don't talk to my kid like that. I wonder what he would say to us about the way we talk to ourselves, about the way we talk to other people. Maybe not to their face, but inside of our own heart. To know God is to know love, and to know love is to show love, John says. In a way, he's saying without showing love, there's really no knowing love, and there's no knowing God. And this love that's shown by God is designed to generate love in the community. That's why John is speaking these words through his pen. That the love that's been shown by God, the point of that is not that the love of God would somehow produce fear in the church. The love of God is shown not so that it would produce like duty in the church or shame in the church. I'm not doing enough. No, that the love shown by God, the hope and the desire is that it would generate love, that the love of God is an engine for human love. It's what powers it. You can't scare someone into loving you. That's not going to work out very well, but can I tell you, sometimes that's a story we tell in the house of God. Like, I need to love God because he might get me. This is this like Halloween God that he's like hiding around the corner. And he's like, no, like I'm here. The thing that you have in your heart, I'm not disgusted by it. I'm not repelled by it. You're like, well, Dave, how do you know that? I know that because one time he rolled a stone away out of a tomb that his dead friend had been lying in, and he enters that story. He says, Lazarus, come out. He's not afraid of how bad that it stinks. Why? Because of his deep and abiding love for you. So, question that I have, I don't know if you have it, but I had it this week. What's the difference in saying that God is love and then in saying that God is loving? Because it's interesting, the Bible doesn't say that God is mercy. The Bible doesn't say that. He has mercy, Psalm 103. As far as the east is from the west, so far have my transgressions, my sin, my brokenness been removed from me. But the Bible does say that God is love. So to say that God is love is to say that all of his activity is loving activity. So to say that God is love is to say that everything he does is loving. All of his activity is loving activity. So when God creates, he creates in love, not out of loneliness. Like, God doesn't create because there's just like nobody around to talk to. He doesn't create because there's just nothing going on. His iCal has been empty for all of eternity, and he needs some stuff to do. He needs a sandbox to play in. No, he creates out of love. To share himself with creation, to share himself with people. When he rules in love. When he judges in love. When he blesses, like those little kids that he calls to himself and tells his disciples, hey, the kingdom is being given to these little ones. And don't you dare get in the way of these little ones seeing my grace and my love and my kindness and my goodness and my faithfulness and my mercy and my resurrection power. When he's blessing those children, he's blessing them in love. When he rebukes, like the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, right? When he's rebuking them what? In love. I happen to believe that Jesus has an overflowing cup of love for the Pharisees. He's like, oh, you guys are missing it. He doesn't want to condemn them. He doesn't want to prove how wrong they are. He wants them to get their arms around the truth of his story. So even when he's doing that in love. And here's what I think the center of this is. That love is not an attribute of God. It is the soil that all of the attributes sprout from. It's not like an attribute of God like faithfulness, goodness, mercy, kindness, patience is an attribute of God. It's the soil. I wish I had both of my hands. The soil, so do you. The soil that all of the attributes come from. And isn't that different than just saying, well, yeah, like he's loving? No, everything, all of the activity God has comes from that soil. And this radically changes who we understand God to be. It radically changes how we show up in relationship with him. We're not showing up in fear or like we're going to be found out by God or God's going to be disgusted by something that's within me. There's some things he wants to be different about you. Like he wants us to grow up and to change. He's not disgusted. He's not grossed out. He's like, hey, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, right? And I'll give you rest. Come to me, everybody who's figured it out, and I'll tell you how much you figured it out. No, come to me, all of you. Even the ones who are disgusted with themselves. I have something to give you. And it's a rest you're not going to find anywhere else. This is the Jesus of the Gospels. It is the soil that all of the attributes grow out of. So I want to end with a question. What's God's love like? And I have 4 minutes, so just 2 things. Number 1, God's love is sacrificial. And God's love is proactive. What does it mean that God's love is sacrificial? The love of God is not emotional attachment that God has to his creation or his creatures, but it is instead a deep commitment to the well-being of his creation and creatures that comes at a great cost to him. Like our need was to receive life, and Jesus gave his life to secure it. And a lot of people think the suffering begins when Jesus is arrested. The suffering of Jesus begins at his birth. That he steps down out of glory, out of being completely united with his Father. That's when the suffering begins. And so his life is suffering. Because he is given a human face. He's given human hands and human arms and a human heart. He wraps his life around a human story so that he can redeem everything that it means to be human. We've talked about this church father before. His name's Gregory of Nazianzus, and he says, that which is not assumed is not healed. It's just a fancy way of saying if Jesus doesn't take on everything that it means to be human, he cannot heal everything that it means to be human. He takes it all on so that he can heal it. This is a sacrificial love, and sometimes, can I just tell you that I'm allergic to sacrifice? Like you're going on a trip with somebody and you're like, hey, any allergies here? Sometimes I want to be like, sometimes I'm allergic to sacrifice. Like sometimes I don't actually want to love sacrificially. Sometimes I want to love comfortably when it fits into what I have on my iCal. And I just wonder what it would be like for us to become a little less allergic to sacrifice. To wrap the gospel story around our hearts a little bit more. So that when we see how long that line is, instead of being like, I don't have time for that today. Instead of loving like that, I wonder if the life of Jesus would call us just to stand in the line and suffer a little bit. I wonder what that might produce in our lives when it comes to loving people that are difficult. And that might include you. So it's sacrificial, it's proactive. God takes the first step. That's why we talk about salvation coming by grace. So Paul, later in the New Testament, for it is by grace that we have been saved through faith. It's not of ourselves, it's a gift of God, so nobody gets to brag about it. God didn't wait passively for humankind to turn toward him or to show themselves to be deserving, but seeing our need, stepped toward us through his Son. It's proactive. He's not waiting for us to figure it out or to even ask him. Humankind doesn't ask Jesus to come to planet Earth. But he's proactive and he does it. There's an image that I think speaks to this that we're all going to see at some point this winter. Brock, can you? So this moment. And you know what this moment is like. If you're on the outside of the car, you're in a different car. Like the person maybe is not getting out of the car, like flagging people down. Will somebody help me, please? Because everybody can see that you need help. They can smell the burnt rubber on your tires. And just as a pro tip today, if you're going to live in South Dakota in the winter, good, just have a little kitty litter in your car, a little sand, right, underneath the tire. Okay, we'll talk about that another time, but just that's a good tip. But you're going to be in this moment. And the proactive love of God is before I jumped out of the car and like, Lord, I don't know if you see these lions that I'm living with right now, but I really need you to rescue me. I need you to do something. I need you to pull me out of this. Before that happens, Jesus comes. The love that he has for me is proactive. The love that he has for you is proactive. Like, he did it first. He stepped toward us first. He didn't wait. And what does it mean, John wants to say, for a church community to have a love for themselves and God and others that is sacrificial and that's proactive? Like, what would be produced in that church? What would happen? Like, how would that church be different? John could have shared about a bunch of things, but in his letter, his sermon, he talks about the love of God over and over and over and over, as if to say this is the soil of the whole thing. Everything grows from this soil. Verse 9, then we're out of here. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world, watch this, that we might live through him. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. And I don't know about you, but I'm so glad God didn't just say, I love you. I'm really glad he showed us. I'm really glad that it's not good enough for God just to use words to describe and demonstrate and enact the great love that he has for you and me, but he desired to show us. And I don't know about you, but that feels like a little bit of a nudge today. To say that I love you and to show that I love you sacrificially and proactively, and to grow in that love together. Let's pray. Jesus, we're grateful today for this love, God, and we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about it, but God, we just ask that by your Spirit you would help us receive it. That for those of us in the room who are really hard on ourselves, that the love that you have for us would impact the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we put ourselves on trial, the way that we condemn ourselves, the way that we do the devil's job for him. And God, thinking in this room today of just the people that we are attached to, and if we're honest, we just have a hard time loving them. God, would you, by your Spirit, empower us to love them sacrificially, proactively? God, would you help us to be wise about that? Would you help us to be discerning about that? And God, in our love for you, God, we pray that our love for you would not be rooted in fear or shame or duty, but our love for you would be an outflowing of the way that you have loved us, that having received your love, we desire to show up like that in the world. So God, in 2025, would you empower us to love others in a way that is meaningful and impactful, Would you in 2025 help us to grow in our self-compassion and self-love that would empower how we show up in the world? Not because there's nothing to grow in or change, or not that we don't need transformation. We absolutely do. But God, would you help us with our self-acceptance because you have accepted us? Would you help us see the image of God that is within us? Because sometimes we struggle to see what is good. So God, would you help us to be loving people sacrificially and proactively? And would that change and transform this community of faith into a place of care and love and life as we wait for your arrival? We pray in the name of Jesus, who came because he loved us. Amen. Thanks so much for being here today. There is a little bit more coffee. If you came in earlier and there's only decaf, it's freezing outside and there's only decaf, my wife Kayla made some more regular, so bless her if you're a coffee person, all right? So enjoy that. That's still warm, don't worry. And then we'll see you next week. Please be careful out there. It's slick. This is a little evidence of how slick it is. Just kind of a free advertisement for Sanford Sports Medicine. So be careful when you're out there. All right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Invitation Church podcast. I want to encourage you to take the message that you just heard and receive every part of it. Every promise from God, every declaration of his great love for you, every word of hope, every reminder that you have been made for more. Allow what you've heard to take root in your soul, to allow Jesus to do the deep work that only he can do. I also want to encourage you to be part of what we are doing here at Invitation as we invite people to live the way of Jesus. Go to the app and become a regular giver, an investor in the story that God is writing in this place. Also, if you found the message meaningful, we'd love to have you share it with someone else as you partner with us in carrying the message beyond the walls of the church. I want to thank you for being here with us.